Hey gang, we are in Niles, Illinois today, just on near the outskirts of the northwest side of Chicago. And we are here to pay respects to an 18-year-old girl who was the first victim of the Hollywood Ripper. And we're at Maryville Cemetery here in Niles, Illinois. And we are in. It's Tricia Pacaccio who we're going to be paying respects to. Again, first victim of this horrible person. But I thought on the way I'll wait until we look at a few graves before I start to tell the story. I happened upon this mausoleum, and it's a newer mausoleum. And I noticed as I was going by the face of a little boy. And of course I was wondering what had happened. And it is Victor, who was riding a motorcycle on the back. It was his 25-year-old cousin who was driving. They didn't have helmets. And unfortunately, his cousin, probably not being experienced at all, hit the brakes like an emergency braking action, and it caused the motorcycle to skid at high speed. They were both thrown 200 feet or so, and little Victor was killed instantly. He died at the scene. And, well, what can be said? It's a terrible story. I was actually out here yesterday, and it was very, very windy, and there were people here. I don't like to interfere, or I'm very respectful if there's people around visiting graves. I really don't like to be walking around if I'm going to do a production. And so I chose to just come early today. There are a lot of new graves in this section, and that's probably why the activity. And I'm walking to the side. I'll just reach over here to this young man. Very sad. Here's another grave. This is very small. I am betting maybe his ashes are here. There's no name. Some beautiful flowers here for Hania, who was a mom. Cubs fan. Jose Gutierrez, looks like. Daniel died in 2012. This is a A very striking monument here, all in bronze. I like that the family did not put the names of the future family members. I think it's just bait for identity thieves that might be cruising around. Here is one that I looked at yesterday for Abby. Abby died after a brief fight with cancer. She died in the hospital. Beautiful woman. It seems like these pictures on the graves are coming back at some of the newer graves that I've seen in different cities. I'm seeing more and more on the newer graves. Well, let's talk about this story. There was in Glenview here, and in Glenview is right next door, one of the suburbs. There was a family, the Pacaccio family, and brothers, a daughter, 18-year-old Tricia, had just come home she'd come home by herself from being out with her friends, I believe, and it was about 1:30 in the morning, and she parked the car in the driveway, and she was going in the side door, and she just never made it in because out of the bushes this maniac came and stabbed her to death. And that would be the first killing of the Hollywood Ripper. So when Dad woke up, Mom and Dad, the next morning, very sad that Dad was getting in his van and he looked over and he saw two little shoes, two little feet sticking up by the door. And he went over, and of course, that was his daughter. Dropped his coffee cup, and well, you just can't imagine what the feeling was. Obviously the police came and everything, and they started an investigation. And there were 15 suspects with two suspects. There were two suspects that were at the top of the list. Actually, the top of the list was Eric Angazum. And these kids, these suspects, these two boys were friends of the family. They were friends of her brothers, and they knew her. They didn't know her, but they were at the house. And so the second suspect was Michael Gargiulo. And he was not being, well, neither one were being cooperative, getting attorneys. I don't know, what would you do? And when they questioned Gargiulo, he put all the blame on his friend, saying, not the blame, but he was pointing the direction off of him. And he said, yeah, he had a black bag and he wanted to hide that bag. And he asked me to help him, which was a lie. Well, they still started to zero in on him just because of his behavior, and they did clear the other boy. And sadly, the case just went cold. They just did not have enough evidence. Now, they did take DNA samples, and they did have, I believe, his DNA pegged So he was the prime suspect. It was about a year or two later. And what they did was they really screwed up the crime scene people. And I didn't know this, but I guess when you swab the fingertips, you have to swab the top and around with one swab, and then to get under the fingernails, you need to get a separate swab, because on top and on the fingers, it's considered casual contact. And under the fingernails, it can be argued as defensive. And I guess that's pretty big. And when they went to the DA with that, the DA was like, not enough. So they knew they had this guy pegged. And in the meantime, what does he do? He flees to California to avoid scrutiny. And that's where all this stuff started, in California. So the next few years pass after that, and we have another murder. It was big news because he murdered a woman that was going out with Ashton Kutcher, who was the up-and-coming actor. Her name was Ashley Ellerin. And I'm not going to get into the full story on that, but basically he was stalking her. He was on the periphery of her friends group, trying to get in the group. And he was awestruck, and he was a wannabe. In fact, he was out there. He did play some bit roles in some movies or something, but he kept hanging around. And then at 2 a.m. they were there at her house, her friends, and they saw he was just out there idling and watching the house. So already some creepy stuff was going on. Actually, what happened was Ashton Kutcher comes over. They had planned to go to a Grammy party, a pre-party, and hang out. They were just kind of starting to date. It's actually, they'd been out together, but this was kind of their first date. That's what's really sad. And he comes over, 10:30, rings the doorbell, no answer. He's waiting, no answer. And finally, he's like, well, I'm out of here. He looks in the window. He looks in all the windows, and in the front window, he can see towards the stairs, looks like somebody spilled a bunch of wine. Well, it wasn't wine, it was blood. How did he know? He didn't know. So long and the short of it is, they got police came over and all of blah, 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 blah. They didn't get any DNA. They didn't get any real evidence. And this was the first murder in California, so they were completely confused as to who would do something like this. They said that the attack was so violent, and that's, I think, the side, on the side with this whole thing is, it's so crazy because there was no rape, there was no robbery. This guy's MO was just savage killing. He was a savage killing machine. That's all he wanted to do. Because they said that, I think she was stabbed 40-some times, and some of the wounds were 6 inches deep. But he had stabbed her skull, and there was even a chunk of her skull that was the size of a puzzle piece. So can you imagine the vicious attack, the anger? Just crazy. So now, about 4 years later, in 2005, in El Monte, California, we have a 32-year-old mother, Maria Bruno, a mother of 4 children who was brutally murdered the same way. She was separated from her husband. Her husband, probably thank God, had custody of the children at that moment. And he came in through a window. The kitchen window was open. Broke the screen open, came in, went in her bedroom and stabbed and mutilated her. He was living right across the courtyard in this apartment complex, so he had obviously been watching her very closely and scheming. And not 3 years later, in 2008, he tries to kill another woman, Michelle Murphy. But Michelle Murphy survives. And again, same kind of thing. Stalking her. He lives right across the street from her. Very smart guy. But Michelle Murphy decided to fight back. She got stabbed several times, but she was able, there was a lull, and she got her feet under him and kicked and sprung him to the floor. And he probably thought, well, I stabbed her like 12 times. She's as good as dead. And he ran out. And as he ran out, he turned around and said, I'm sorry. So DNA was collected because he had cut himself. And that is where his story started to end. Well, his capture. He was captured. They lined it up on CODIS. Here is the grave of Tricia. Looks like it was pretty windy yesterday. Yep. Tricia Lynn Pacaccio. Beautiful face, heart, and soul. 1993. Very sad. So what's going on? What happened? California trial. Gets convicted. Jury says, we recommend the death penalty. That was about 2 years ago. Took all that time to do that. The judges allowed for all the delays. That's all I can say. Defense attorneys are going to do their thing. Can't blame them, but it's really sad because to this day, as we stand here right now, there's been no sentence. And time goes on, and when you get the death sentence, if you get the death sentence, you get 30 more years to live. So I don't know, what's the point of it all? And they're trying to get him, when that's over, he's going to be extradited back here to the Chicago area to face a trial for Tricia Pacaccio's death. So this is going to go on, and this guy's going to get to live his life in prison. And by the way, I can't say whether, I'm not saying I'm for the death penalty, but to show you how messed up it is California has that sentence. In Illinois, it's 25 years to life is the maximum sentence for him. So how's that figure? Somebody that did a crime like that, 25 years to life. I don't know. Doesn't seem just. So anyway, we've paid our respects to Tricia and We say a prayer also for her and for the other women killed. And let's just follow this story and hope that, well, let's hope he gets sentenced to death, I guess. But the main thing is that he never gets on the street again. Rest in peace to the women. Signing out.